Hello everyone, welcome back to our Ask the Advisor Live. I'm coming to you from our headquarters location, both on Facebook and YouTube Live. So thank you everyone for joining today. We're going to be covering one of those topics that especially this time of year, in combination with everything with COVID-19 going on and that sort of thing, is top of mind: paying for college. So last time we had a lot of great questions coming in. We were talking about student loan repayment. We actually thought we'd move it over a little bit to talking about actually paying for college. You guys have already probably started applying. You probably already started getting acceptance letters, and you're probably already considering how are you going to pay for it. So like all my lives, this is really about what you guys are looking for help. What questions do you have, and what sort of information are you looking for? Or maybe there's something I can help you clear up. My name's Elaine Rubin. I am the Senior Contributor and Communications Specialist here at Edvisors. I've worked in this field for more than 10 years, and on top of that, I've had to do it. I've had to figure out how to pay for college, how to get all the funding I need, all the applications, do everything on time. So I definitely have some great tips to share with you guys. But as anytime, please feel free to ask questions. I've got my eyes on the chat, so if you see my eyes looking around, that's what I'm looking to do. If any questions come in and maybe you don't want to ask in front of a live audience, I get it. There's a lot of stuff that goes into paying for college, and there could be some really sensitive topics that maybe you personally don't want to discuss. If that is you, please feel free to send us a direct message. If I don't catch it on the live, we will be sure to get back to you. Also on edvisors.com, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you actually have the option to ask a question through Ask the Advisor Live, and my team will get back to you and give you some advice that we can share and help you through whatever obstacle you're facing or what's going on. So today's about paying for college. So if you got questions that you want to get, we just make sure, sorry, I couldn't see the questions right there. If you have questions that you want answered, feel free to type them in the chat. I'll be keeping my eye on the chat. I do have, just adjusting my YouTube camera real quick. I do have both screens up to kind of help me through and make sure we get those questions answered for you. Make sure to like this and share this with anybody who you think could ask a question, or maybe has been struggling with some aspect of paying for college. So jumping in, when we're talking about paying to college, we're talking about, the different ways you can do it. There's the common ones we know: financial aid, paying cash if you have the luxury or ability to do that, as well as scholarships. So I definitely want to share some tips about all of this. But you know what ties into paying for college? Choosing a college. Choosing the right college that kind of makes sense for you and your family, that is considered affordable. So one of the tips I always want to let people know is, when you are looking to choose a college, you're getting those acceptance letters in and some financial aid offers as well, be ready to and know what number you're looking for. What is your price range? What can you reasonably afford in order to go to college? Now, this question can have a lot of different impacts. So there's one thing you got to keep in mind. There's tuition and fees, right? We all know about tuition and fees, stuff and money that you will owe the school to go there. Some schools will include housing if you're going to live on campus, required meal plans, parking, those sort of things you owe the school. But beyond that, there's other types of expenses you really need to keep top of mind. Things like living expenses, if you're not going to be on campus. Everyday expenses, if you're used to living at home with mom or dad or your guardian, and you're used to having the things that you need for everyday life, things like laundry detergent, coverage for utilities, cell phone, you need to have an understanding of all those additional costs beyond just what you will be paying your school. You definitely need to create some sort of budget, some sort of realistic budget for your year, your upcoming year. So if you're one of those incoming freshmen, you have to look at that now. And as you're looking at all your options, all your acceptances coming in, you need to have a realistic budget of what you can afford, a price range for a college where you can comfortably pay that, and then also you can take care of your everyday expenses. Now, I get it when you apply for schools. Hello, Nico. Thank you for joining us. Just saw that come in. If you have a question, please feel free to ask your question that you may have. Just keeping an eye out there. Just making sure I don't miss any of those out of the corner of my eye. But you know, what were we talking about? Yeah, you're getting all those acceptances, and good job, you got here, you figured it out. But you know, there might have been some schools in there that maybe you knew was out of your price range. You do have to have a little bit of like a moment, a really soul-searching moment to understand and make those decisions that are incredibly difficult, because you know, there could be a school of your dreams in there that has accepted you, but if it's unaffordable, you do have to look at long-term impacts beyond just figuring out the short term. Things like borrowing student loans, or you know, there are even situations where maybe student loans aren't even an option for you. So things like that to keep in mind. It looks like we have a question coming in from Anita. Thank you for joining us today. What if a budget changes? Can you get more financial aid? That's a great question. When you're establishing your own budget and you're creating your own numbers, your school is actually going to be doing the same kind of thing for you. They'll be creating what's known as a cost of attendance. And with your cost of attendance, they'll take that and all the information you put into one of the most important steps of paying for college, which is completing your FAFSA form, and they will actually come up with an expected family contribution, which they'll use to help determine your financial aid. So you've also got your school's budget, which is also known as that cost of attendance. If your school is awarding you financial aid and you know they were able to cover any financial gaps you have and you were able to go there and afford to go there, but something happens at home, mom or dad no longer is able to help you pay, you're unable to pay because some sort of emergency situation comes up, you definitely want to talk to your financial aid office and they'll see what they can do. That doesn't mean financial aid will have a solution for you. They will look to see what they can do to help you through, depending on the circumstance, which might have changed your budget. They might be able to offer different types of emergency assistance or emergency aid or anything like that. We saw that a lot with the COVID-19 pandemic. School years were interrupted, students were dependent on things like financial aid, and there was some assistance offered to those students for that particular situation. But if something else comes up, it's going to be up to the financial aid office. One important thing to note when it comes to paying for college, a lot of confusion about expected family contribution. And Anita, this brings up a great topic. Expected family contribution is the index number determined when you complete the FAFSA. And essentially, when a school looks at their cost of attendance, they generally subtract your expected family contribution to determine your financial need. Your school may or may not be able to cover your financial need with the financial aid available to offer you. It's going to be up to what sort of financial need you have and the resources the school has to award you for that. It's not uncommon that you will have to pay more than your calculated expected family contribution. That's a major concern of families, and there is a lot of confusion around that because that term is a little odd. It makes you think that's what I have to pay, that's what me and my family have to come up with. That's not necessarily true. And the expected family contribution is only looked at when it comes to awarding things like need-based aid. It's not necessarily looked at or used in the equation with non-need-based aid, but non-need-based aid both of them could be limited. What's offered through the federal government under the federal student aid programs, what's offered by the state is generally where schools kind of get a start when it comes to awarding you financial aid. And then it's left up a bit to the school to come up with different options they have available for their students if they have any. every school is going to have different criteria and different ways to award financial aid, especially when it comes to their own institutional aid. Federal aid follows a very specific requirement for you to qualify for certain types of need-based aid, like the Pell Grant or the FSEOG grant, which you might see in several different ways on those financial aid award letters, but it's the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grants. So you might see supplemental in there is generally how I see it listed, but everyone's a little different. And those are need-based grants offered by the federal government. But when it comes to student loans, unsubsidized direct Stafford loans are considered need-based. Unsubsidized are not considered need-based unsubsidized loans. And then when we get into PLUS loans and other types of federal aid, those PLUS loans actually require an additional application, and you will need to qualify for them. There is a credit check run for a PLUS loan, and they're only available to parents of dependent undergraduate students or graduate students. So those might be a little bit more limited, even though those tend to be ways that families look to fill financial gaps beyond looking at other things like private student loans, which are other options to consider. But great question. Regina has a question coming in. Are grants available for master's graduate student? When it comes to sorry, I think I said that kind of fast because this is a fantastic question, Regina. Grant availability for master's and graduate degree programs. Now, if you are looking at federal student aid programs, grants offered after you complete the FAFSA, none of those are going to be graduate program options. They're just not available to graduate students. That's just the way the program kind of works. There's one very small exception for a teacher post-baccalaureate certification, but that is one very narrow exception, and unless Regina, you can tell me otherwise, it's probably not what you're looking for anyways. But the federal student aid program is limited to basically unsubsidized direct Stafford loans and PLUS loans. When we're looking at federal student aid programs, when it comes to graduate students, there could be grant programs or fellowships. A great keyword to look for when you're a graduate student is things like fellowships, because those could be other opportunities. Sometimes there is some sort of work component or research or something with the fellowship. Sometimes, especially with the private sponsors of different fellowships, there could be a little bit of cross between that terminology between grants and fellowships, but definitely something to look into. There could be some state programs that offer grants towards graduate students or different specialties that they're targeted to different specialties and different types of degrees. And then other places to look would be your school. Your school could also have grants available for graduate students as well as other fellowship opportunities as well. But great question when it comes to the federal student aid program, which is one of the more common known types of financial aid. Grants are not targeted towards graduate students. So that's a fantastic question. And keep your questions coming in, keeping an eye on the chat. One time I had an issue with scroll and didn't realize that I needed to scroll to see the different questions coming in. But I don't think that's happening here. So feel free, as a question comes to mind, send it through. I do have someone also making sure to check our mailbox. So I'm keeping an eye on that as well. No problem, Regina. So, so we've covered quite a bit already, and I just want to thank everyone for joining and keep your questions coming. I'm by no means jumping off anytime soon because I've got a lot of tips to share as well. And like I said, I'll usually finish kind of where I'm going with something and then jump right into a question that comes in. So if you're an incoming freshman and you're looking for the school, we've talked a little bit about making sure that you're evaluating your acceptances and choosing a place to enroll that is a reasonable cost to you and your family for not only the stuff you owe to the school, but that everyday living. All those everyday living expenses are definitely important to keep in mind. And When you're looking at financial aid letters, when it comes to paying for college, you want to understand everything that's on there. A minute ago, I was just talking about that FSEOG grant, that federal grant in there, that federal supplemental opportunity education grant. It's quite the tongue twister to say, but that's a great example of something that looks different on many different financial aid award letters. You might see it spelled out differently. It might have the word grant, it might not, so it could cause some confusion. Other areas to keep in mind are things like loans. If there's something on there, you're not sure what it is, and it doesn't tell you if it's a loan, it doesn't tell you if it's a grant or a scholarship, it's best to find out. And if you see something like a PLUS loan on your financial aid award letter, also know that there's an additional application and there could be different qualifications out there. Sometimes we do see undergraduate students packaged with a Parent Plus loan. That would require the parent, your parent, to choose to borrow money to help pay for your education. It is not required that a parent borrow money in order to pay for your college. So that isn't guaranteed money. That does need an extra step of that application and kind of an understanding and acceptance from that parent that they do want to take that on. And any parents or graduate students in that situation, I always encourage you to look at all your options when it comes to paying for college, to choose, if you're using a loan, to choose the loan that makes sense for you. One that has, a lot of people are always look for some of the top things like low interest rates, no or low origination fees. So that could either be part of the federal program, and it also could be part of the private student loan kind of world, where you would have to go out and find a lender to work with and see if that's the way you want to go. So just things to keep in mind with that. And also other things about your financial aid letter. If you're seeing things, especially as an incoming freshman, if you're seeing information on there for scholarships, flag those and do a little more research. Sometimes if it's offered through your school, that particular scholarship, you can probably find information on your school's financial aid website. Do a little research to understand the type of scholarship that's being offered to you. Is it only for your incoming freshman year? Can you renew it for additional years beyond that freshman year? And what are the requirements to keep it if you can have it for more than 1 year? Do you have to have a certain GPA? Is it based for a particular degree you're seeking? All things to keep in mind, at least to know, because if you are getting a degree, say in something in the College of Liberal Arts, and then you decide you want to switch to maybe a degree in business, you might be switching your eligibility, or you might be eliminating your eligibility for a degree that's specific for your liberal arts degree that you originally had. So just keep those things in mind. Some of these things are those situations we've seen. I've seen a lot of them, so they might be things that never happened to you. But also, as a 3-time major switcher, is that how you say it? I switched my major 3 times for my undergraduate degree. There could be, consequences to that. So just things to flag and things to know in order to make sure you know what you're committing to and the requirements of you. I hope that all makes sense. And, if any questions come up from anything I'm talking about, or you have additional questions about something you're going through, feel free to just jot it down in the comments and I can get to it. I'm keeping an eye on it right now. So yeah, those are some things to look at with those financial aid award letters. I do want to jump back a little bit to basically all your options to pay for college. We definitely have that option to pay cash. You can pay the sticker price or the price that's required of you to pay. You could do it the traditional way where, one lump sum at the start of every term or every year, however your school requires payment. There are other things you can look at as well. Some parents are really interested, and some students as well, as maybe looking at things like tuition payment plans, because maybe that lump sum is a little too much. Or it's not comfortable for you to release that lump sum in one payment, but you can cover the costs that you owe to the school and any other expenses over time. You can look at things like tuition payment plans and ask your school or your potential school for your options around that. That's a definitely something you want to look into, especially if you're close to being able to afford it with cash and not worrying about too much beyond the financial aid or anything like that. Definitely something to ask about. And the sooner you can establish that based on the rules with your school, the better, because it'll probably give you a little more time to cover any outstanding balances that you have. If you need a tuition payment plan and tuition's due the next day, that's probably, you're going to have to ask your school. Some schools do like payment before the start of the term or before you start taking classes. So just something to keep in mind. Issues I've seen with kind of owing balances to schools, which I think schools try to avoid, is, it can limit your ability to continue enrollment at that institution. If you're trying to transfer to someone else, another school, and you have an outstanding balance with that particular school, it might be hard to get those transcripts or anything you need to help transfer some credits or show work that you've already done towards a degree. It might be difficult to do that, especially if that school where you're transferring wants an official transcript and you don't have one. If there's an outstanding balance issue, we have definitely seen some issues around that with students being able to get what they need in order to complete different applications. When it comes to applying for financial aid, I will not stress this. I will always stress this. If you have not completed the FAFSA, you still have time. I would recommend to do it now. It really isn't what I call your parents' FAFSA, and even that is getting to be a different term now. But the FAFSA is now online. It can be completed on an app. Some things, especially if you've already completed a FAFSA in the past, can be, automatically input for you. You can also input some information from the IRS for some tax information that you need to report. Most people can get it done within a few minutes. That's not to say that people don't have problems and people get concerned with some of the questions on there. Problems still do kind of happen. People get confused, or there's a confusing situation at home. That's typically where we see a lot of trouble there. And that's okay, because there's definitely a lot of resources out there to help you. We have a guide on edvisors.com. We also have Ask the Edvisor on edvisors.com, where you can submit a question to help you with anything that you kind of get stuck with. And then always, last resort is to call the U.S. Department of Education and ask for help from them. And many schools will actually help you with the FAFSA process as well. If you set up some time, or some of them might even have financial aid nights. Not sure how they're doing it this year, but I'm sure they'll have different ways and different opportunities out there to help you through if you need it with the FAFSA. I just recommend, if you need to complete the FAFSA, to get that done as soon as possible. The other thing you don't want to wait for is a deadline. You have your school deadline, your state deadline. The FAFSA deadline is there, but it tends to be basically at the end of your academic year. So just keep that in mind, that if you haven't done it, to kind of get it done now. You don't want to wait until the night before a deadline and then have issues or things you're unable to resolve in the amount of time you've left yourself. You definitely want to get that done. Other important financial aid applications you want to complete, if you haven't already, things like the CSS profile. And this one gets missed sometimes. I don't want you guys to miss out on this one. But your school or your state could have additional applications that you need to complete in order to be eligible for different types of scholarships. I've seen this a lot. I've gotten a lot of calls and a lot of questions after a deadline has been missed of what can I do now? Depending on who the scholarship application is going to, your school or your state or anything like that, the deadline could be pretty strict and it could be a hard deadline. So get those applications in. If they're available for you to start complete them as soon as possible. You really don't want to wait till the last minute. Some great tips I've heard for people when it comes to especially scholarship applications. Set a deadline for yourself that's a week before the actual deadline of any scholarship. Some people go as extreme as 2 weeks before the deadline of any scholarship. Because if it's a state scholarship, a school scholarship, or someone through a private sponsor of a scholarship or a private organization, those deadlines sometimes are fixed and there's not much you can do about it once the deadline passes. So especially those scholarships, which we're going to jump to as another way to pay for college, any scholarship that requires an application, an essay, a video, anything that they could possibly require, get that stuff together and ready to go at least a week before the actual deadline. That way you can fill in the blanks if you miss something. And the third option to pay for college is scholarships. So this topic can take many different forms, as Regina pointed out earlier, in the discussion there, looking at the type of program you're in can be a consideration for the types of scholarships or grants you're eligible for. Typically, when we talk about grants and scholarships, grants tend to be more financial need based. They're offered or used, the term is generally used if it's like something for financial need to help cover those costs of college. Scholarships generally are targeted towards maybe some skills, some specialties, achieving something. You could get a scholarship, but the words are very interchangeable. The other interchangeable word, especially when we get into the graduate world, could be fellowship, but fellowships always read the fine print because there could be something tied to that, like some sort of work component, some sort of research component, and that sort of thing. So just keep in mind with the term fellowship to read a little bit more to understand what it's asking of you. But these are all fantastic ways to help you pay for college. Now, scholarships, people feel like they apply and they apply and they apply, especially to those private scholarships, and maybe they're not seeing the results that they want. Some of those scholarships have, bigger pools that they need to pick a winner from. And also some of the scholarships with like essays or other things, you could be disqualified for not meeting the basic conditions. If there's a word count, if there's a topic you need to cover. I will say we had a essay-based scholarship for our scholarshippoints.com scholarship sweepstakes. And that one was actually based on essay. You had an answered essay prompt. We reviewed every single one and picked those that stood out. So scholarship essays can be a lot of work, but what we flagged was some people were just providing essays that had nothing to do with our prompt. Maybe they thought we didn't read them. Maybe there's a lot of things that go into that. But if you've gone through, the process of filling out the information and all you have to do is put on an essay, yes, it is extra work, but essays are a great opportunity to stand out. If you are doing something that's more kind of a luck-based or some sort of sweepstakes, you could win them, and that would be fantastic. Or other types of scholarships where, what you have to provide is very minimal, you do want to find a way to stand out. Essays give you that opportunity to take a unique twist on completing those. And then having the person who's reading it feel like they've gotten to know you a little bit, you stand out from the crowd, you add another element that really, you just kind of resonates with other people as being unique and being very helpful. So when it comes to scholarships, there are several different kinds and sources. We've talked about state scholarships, we've talked about school scholarships. We're generally run through those particular programs. With the state ones, generally, you might only need to complete the FAFSA, and that's it. Other ones could be that you need to complete the FAFSA and an additional application or form through your state. Keep an eye on stuff like that. When it comes to schools, it could be, once again, just the FAFSA or CSS profile, but they might need certain applications for different types of scholarships or opportunities offered. Just make sure you know what's being asked of you and what you need to turn in. For private scholarships, basically, you do have to do quite a bit of legwork on your own. You do have to go out and find scholarships to apply for. And anytime you're finding scholarships for a more limited pool or a pool that's not going to be as big as kind of like the general public, it might increase your chances of winning them or standing out or being awarded a scholarship through them. There's fewer people in there, the easier it will be. For example, I actually got a lot of scholarships from my local community that was offered. I got the application and the information from my school counselor in high school. So that was a great way for me to get my name in a pool that was limited more to my community. So you can go out and look for those types of opportunities, those local type of opportunities. But I will also say it is worth it to set up some sort of schedule or some sort of kind of plan to apply for scholarships through private organizations or different scholarship providers, even the ones that could be nationwide, especially if you think you have a good reason why you could potentially win some of those. Because it will, if you do win a larger scholarship, that will make it that much easier. Every dollar you're able to pay through a scholarship or cash on your own, the easier it will be for you to afford college. A great plan to kind of aim for: apply to 2 scholarships per week. Use sites like studentScholarshipPoints.com. There's several out there that can help you through. And StudentScholarships.com is actually one run by Edvisors as well. So that's a great recommendation there. Also, there's some other sites you could also use. Also, as an organization, we do have a few scholarship programs that we run. ScholarshipPoints.com is a sweepstakes-based scholarship through us. And to date, we've actually awarded over $1 million. So there are definitely opportunities out there. Scholarships can be offered by any company who's willing to have some sort of scholarship fund. It takes the time to find them and apply for them, and make sure you're doing yourself justice when you apply them about following the directions, answering the questions being asked to you, and meet those minimum requirements, especially for things like videos, for written essays and that sort of thing. Also, if you need letters of recommendation, if you need to make sure to set up an interview, all those things come into it. And because there's so many scholarships out there, each one could have their own requirements. So definitely keep an eye on that. So we've covered quite a bit. I do want to take some time to kind of wait to see if any other questions come in from anyone who's been on. For those of you, and as we kind of wait a little bit, I'm going to go over some things you can do now. Some things you can do now to help cover either your tuition or some of those everyday expenses and living expenses you'll need for college. Because paying for college, like we talked about before, is not always just what you owe the school, especially if you won't be living at home, you'll be living on campus, off campus, that sort of thing. There could be other things that you need to plan for. It is not too late to start saving money. Now, you have to be realistic about how much money you can actually save, right? You have to be realistic, and, depending on what you're doing, if you can take on some side hustles, if you can work part-time at local places and earn some money, we do have to be realistic on how much you can actually save now, but it's not too late to save money. You could actually start setting some goals for you to create a savings account if you haven't already. If you already have, that's fantastic, but you can always add to it. So I recommend always setting some goals. Set some goals on every paycheck that comes into you, that a certain amount or percentage will go into savings for your college expenses. So everyone's paycheck's going to be different, and so sometimes percentages are easier to look at. But if you can, put 75% of that paycheck in a savings account for college, at least 50%, and limit your spending money. Getting to college is right around the corner, especially for those who are starting in the fall. It might seem a really long way away, but if you're only able to save $50 or $100, there's only a limited amount you can save until you have to start classes or start paying for things. But just, have that in the back of your mind, that as you're earning money in these coming months, to start saving that money so you're ready and you can help pay for some of your everyday expenses, or even chip in on tuition if you can. So if any other questions, I don't see any other questions coming in. But I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and we're actually going to be going over scholarships specifically. So I know we had a little bit of a sneak peek and a little bit of a preview of some scholarship advice. Because we're talking about paying for college, I definitely didn't want to leave you guys hanging without putting in a super important component to paying for college, which is scholarships. But we're going to have a whole session covering scholarships, where to get them, the different types, where to find them, and really specific strategies in order to make sure you're getting your applications in on time, and just tips to help you stand out and hopefully win some scholarship money. So make sure to tune in. It's 2 Thursdays from now, so that'll be the 28th of January. Any other questions that come in, just because we're not live doesn't mean we won't answer them. You can either put them on the chat to this video. You can also ask them through direct message, or you can go to edvisors.com, scroll down to Ask the Edvisor. I'll be sure to put the link in the comments there as well. So you can go directly to that page and you can ask your question there, and someone from my team or I will answer it for you. So thank you everyone for joining today. And I will see you guys soon. Thanks.